So we strongly support a student's interest in confidentiality in sexual violence cases, and we think that generally the situations in which the school is going to have to override such a request is going to be limited, and when that is done, still the information need only be shared with individuals who are responsible for handling the school's response. You don't have to tell every administrator on your campus about the sexual violence incident if they're not the ones who are responsible for handling the school's response. So even if a student doesn't specifically ask for confidentiality, again, you can limit the individuals who the information is disclosed to those who are responsible for the school's response. Again, regardless of whether they request confidentiality, you are able to grant that request, you override that request. Remember, you always need to think about interim measures for all the students that come to you, and I'll talk about that again in a few slides. So what do you do if a student requests confidentiality? So we know that sometimes, and we use the term confidentiality to encompass students who say, look, I'm reporting this to you, I don't want you to do anything about it, or I want you to do something about it, but I don't want the alleged perpetrator to find out my name or my identity, things like that. That we use the broad term confidentiality. So your schools going to need to think about whether it can honor that request while still providing a safe and non-discriminatory environment for all students. That's the key thing, because that's your Title IX obligation. You have obligations not just to the student who was subjected by sexual violence, but to all the students and employees on your campus. So we think it works best if there's kind of a central figure on your campus who's responsible for analyzing these requests. At OCR, we think it's great if that person is the Title IX coordinator. Obviously, your schools have freedom to select a different individual. The reason why we recommend the Title IX coordinator is that that person needs to have knowledge of all these types of incidents going on across your campus. So that person kind of is in the best sense to analyze this request in the context of all the other sexual violence related incidents that have gone on your campus, wouldn't be aware of prior complaints against the same perpetrator or things like that. You may also consider involving if you have a sexual assault response coordinator in this confidentiality analysis discussion to kind of work with the Title IX coordinator or other individual on your campus who you've given that responsibility. So now what do you do when you get the confidentiality request? Take them seriously, first of all, and then you got to consider a number of different factors. These factors were laid out in the Q&A, and they build on factors that were in the 2001 guidance. Sorry, the 2001 guidance had factors, but that was obviously more focused on sexual harassment that was not sexual violence. So we based off those, but then we tried to select factors that were more relevant in the sexual violence context. So, sorry. First, consider whether there are circumstances suggesting that there's an increased risk of the alleged perpetrator committing sexual violence again, committing additional acts of sexual violence. So have there been other sexual violence complaints about that same individual? Does the alleged perpetrator have a history of arrests or records from a prior school that you are aware of, that you have access to, that indicate a history of past violence? Did the alleged perpetrator threaten further sexual violence? Also consider whether the alleged sexual violence was committed by multiple perpetrators. Is there an increased risk of future sexual violence under similar circumstances? So does the report that you've gotten reveal a pattern of perpetration, either using drugs or alcohol, or a pattern that exists at a given location by a particular group, something like that? Was the sexual violence perpetrated with a weapon? We know not that common on college campuses, but it could be. The age of the student subjected to sexual violence, again, that's more common a factor at the secondary level than post-secondary. And also whether your school has other means to obtain relevant evidence. So if you happen to have a video of this, you may be able to kind of go forward with the investigation and a full investigation, put the alleged perpetrator on notice, and not necessarily need to involve the complainant in that process. Or if you have physical evidence, security cameras, things like that. So 2 examples to kind of make clear what we're talking about. If your school has credible information that the alleged perpetrator has committed 1 or more rapes, then the balance of these factors is likely going to compel your school to have to investigate the allegation fully and pursue disciplinary action against the perpetrator. And doing that is going to require the disclosure of the student's identity to the alleged perpetrator. On the other hand, if there's no credible information about prior sexual violence, the alleged sexual violence, there was no weapon involved, there were no threats to repeat the sexual violence, it doesn't appear to be part of a larger pattern, then under analyzing the incident under all those factors, it's likely going to compel you to be able to respect the student's request for confidentiality. So those are two kind of maybe extreme examples, but to try to understand what we're thinking about when we're asking you to analyze the factors.